into our speaker. Cassidy Kemp joins us today from the City of Houston Parks and Rec Department. And you've been there 4 years? 4 years. And she worked on, I'm going off of memory here, the Nature Preserve Ordinance and the Water Management Plan. She contributed to that. So we're just so excited. She brings a wealth of knowledge. So give a warm welcome to Cassidy.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks y'all for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you about this initiative. I feel like I talk about our prairie restorations a lot, and when you guys asked for this to be all about the Riparian initiative, I was excited. A little change of pace, and it's a really cool program that we have with a lot of components, and so excited to share. And this was up briefly before the meeting. Someone already asked me what park that was. So it's Brock Park. If you haven't been, it's on the northeast side of Houston, and it's one of our nature preserves. It's really pretty. 2 different bayous run through. I think it's where Halls and Greens come together, and there's a lot of natural areas, and there's a bayou greenways trail. So plugging for Brock Park. So just some background on the Houston Parks and Recreation Department. We started in 1916 with just 2 parks, and now we have over 380. They're all throughout Houston. So I put this so you can see the locations of our parks, and it's over 26,000 acres of land. So just point out some. This is Lake Houston Wilderness Park, past Kingwood. It's really cool. It's 5,000 acres of forest, and it's along San Jacinto, and it's just really cool natural area. You can camp there. There's really nice trails if anyone hasn't been to Lake Houston Wilderness. It used to be owned by Texas Parks and Wildlife. And then this is Addicts Reservoir, but our department operates it as Cullen Park. So it's in our inventory, but we don't own it. It's owned by the Corps. And then so this is 610 here. This Memorial Park where we are, and then some of our other larger parks are Herman Brown, Keith Wise, and that's Brock. So just kind of orient you to where our parks are in Houston. And so I'm in the Natural Resources Division. It was only created in 2014, so within the span of the whole Parks Department, we're a really young group. And so we're doing a lot of things that are just at the beginning. We're very baseline information gathering. We started with our natural area inventory, and that was sending interns out all over the city with Trimble GPS units and walking around the natural areas within parks. So we knew where our natural areas were, how many acres we had. And so that was kind of where we started. We're also we're in charge of all the natural areas, but also water features within parks, water quality. We're writing our water management plan right now, and wildlife, and we do a lot of prairie and riparian restoration projects. So that's what I'm talking about today, is our riparian initiative. But we also passed our nature preserve ordinance in 2022. That provides some protection to the natural areas within parks. It designates them as a separate land type within our parks that cannot be developed into other types of park uses. So that was just some of our biggest natural areas got that designation. But this is about the Riparian Restoration Initiative, and in one sentence, that is the creation or enhancement of forested riparian buffers in all parks adjacent to bayous or any type of waterways. So that is the most simple way to put it, but we'll get into the details. This is one of our sites where we planted a riparian buffer, and that's Sims Bayou in the background. So this room might all know about all of this, but a refresher about what a riparian buffer is. It is the area along a bayou or a waterway. Here in Houston, our riparian areas were forested. So we have a forested buffer buffering the land away from the stream, apart from the stream itself. And there's so much going on with why these are important, but for one thing, they filter our runoff. So when water is falling as rainwater all throughout the landscape, in order to enter this stream, it's going to pass through this buffer on its way. And while that's happening, it's getting cleaned and the water quality is improving greatly. And not only that, but the shade provided from these trees drops the temperature of the waterway. That also helps with water quality. And this forested habitat provides so much for wildlife. There's a lot of wildlife that really depends on these buffers being there along our bayous. They also do everything that any other type of tree planting would do. So they're storing carbon and improving air quality and making things look really nice and providing recreational opportunities for everyone. But because of this really strategic and important location of the buffer right along the waterway, that's where all the other benefits come in. And yeah, so that's kind of the basic overview. The wider your riparian buffer, the more benefits you're gonna have. So the trees right along the bayou, this zone is really important for bank stabilization, preventing its high flows from eroding the sides of the stream. Then the wider you get, the bigger benefits for water quality, for flood control, for wildlife habitat. So this is what our goal is to see in our parks. And just wanted to point out some of the wildlife that would call these areas home. And this is kind of divided into 3 sections: the wildlife that are living in the water, on the water, and along the water's edge. So these like kingfishers you see a lot in the trees along the waterway, and they need that perch, and they sit there and wait and watch, and they swoop down and go get a fish. These are some of our historic riparian buffers that you can see on old aerial imagery from the 40s. So this is what they look like from above. So this is the waterway. This is Hall's Bayou running through Keith Wise Park. And this is the riparian buffer. It's about 300 feet wide in this picture. And then everywhere else is our coastal prairie habitat. And this is that same image today. So this part of Halls that is south of our park has no riparian buffer remaining, and the development goes really close to the waterway itself, and there are no trees. So this is not what we want to see in our parks. But within the park, we still have a forested area along the bayou. This was just protected by our nature preserve ordinance. It's really important for us to especially protect our natural areas along waterways. So just some quick facts about the initiative. The total span of it is within over 70 parks and 1,000 acres of restoration. We have 25 sites that were either completed up until this point or we are currently working on. So we are making our way through the initiative. It first began in 2017 with Milby Park, and I'll be going through that park in detail so you can see the process. And it was announced by Mayor Sylvester Turner in 2020. They did a big press release, and we were a part of a lot of the city's planning at the time with the Climate Action Plan and the Resilient Houston Plan. So this is really a citywide initiative. And we were also invited to be a part of the Texas Coastal Resiliency Master Plan, which is a document for the whole state of Texas, mapping out how we can make our coastal communities more resilient to climate change and just changes in the future. And so they found this initiative to be substantial enough to the resiliency of the whole state. And so we have a really nice write-up in their plan, and that was really nice to participate. So these are the major bayou watersheds that are in Harris County. And we have parks in many of these watersheds. And one of the main things that makes Houston so special is just downstream of all of these waterways is Galveston Bay. So our water quality in the Houston area directly flows into the bay, which is one of the most important estuary ecosystems in the whole country. It's very productive in fisheries and shrimp, but all estuary ecosystems are critical to all of the waterways downstream of them and all of the plant and animal communities, but also they are really sensitive to water quality. So the fact that this huge and ecologically important, very, very fragile ecosystem is just downstream of Houston, which is one of the most developed areas in Texas, means that everything that we can do for water quality is so important. So a lot of the grants that we've gotten to implement this initiative are specifically for water quality, and a lot of them are from TCEQ, which is the state organization that regulates water quality. This is a zoom in of one of those watersheds. So you can see how our parks align themselves. This is just pulling out the parks that are in this initiative. So throughout the waterway, we have land in parks. And so we are trying to do our part in putting these buffers back into our parks along waterways. And this is a little outdated. More of these would be green now. So we've really focused a lot on Sims. We've done almost all of the parks in this watershed. So we have two different kinds of projects. If a riparian forested area already exists in the park, we call it an enhancement project, which is just trying to increase the habitat value of that forest and the health of it overall, mostly with invasive species removal and planting. And then a creation site is where, like in that picture of Hall's Bayou, there's no riparian area left, but there's part of the park that is maybe just underutilized. It's an open lawn grass area. We do complete reforestation and can create a buffer. So this was our first project at Milby Park along Sims Bayou. And this is considered a creation site. There's one thin line of trees right along the water, but there's a lot of this open area that was just long grass. And this is a really long park, so it had the opportunity to do a big project here all along the water. It was funded by a TCEQ non-point source grant, which we partnered with the Student Conservation Association for. And this was our first ever project. I don't think they knew that that the Riparian Initiative existed when this happened, but it's the first project that we did for it. But this is how the park looked prior to restoration. This is what we don't want to see, all of this long grass leading up to the water. And this is a really industrial side of town. It's very close to where Sims converges with Buffalo Bayou. So we came in and did a reforestation. It was a tree planting on a 10-foot grid. And they're all in these straight lines. That really helps us with maintenance, but you don't see them after the project grows in. You can't tell they were straight lines. And it was over 2,000 trees because of how long and linear that area was along the bayou. We planted all of those trees with community volunteers at many different planting events. And all of the trees were mulched, and then all of the trees were watered in. And those were the main kind of methods that we did here. I have some slides about species. That's a good question. So this is, yeah.
So how do you water that?
That is a good question. It's very hard. That's kind of one of our challenges. We've had to figure out when we first started doing these mass tree plantings, how to water them. And, I was on this project at the time, and I was riding around an ATV filled with hoses, like all of the hoses you could ever imagine. And we had quick couplers installed throughout the site, so I could hook up my hoses. And I would just stay out there for hours and hours and hours watering trees. There's water source, yeah. And we also were we put a water tank with like a pump and a reel-in hose on the back of a truck, so that we could drive around more freely and water like that. Now we have really large water tank trucks that you have to have a CDL, a commercial driver's license, to drive. We've tried trailers with water tanks on the back. We've tried temporary irrigation. Watering is our biggest challenge.
And also, how frequently do you have to water it, for how long?
Okay, I'll repeat the question. The question is, how frequently do we have to water, and for how long? It depends so much on the weather. But we try to keep, for the first 2 years after the planting, really regular watering. So every other week if we can. And if it rains, give yourself an extra week or so off. Depending, we use, if y'all haven't ever used this website, the Harris County flood warning system shows you gauges all over town, and it's in real time.
Yeah.
So we use that now that we have 25 of these sites. We're looking at seeing where the rain is falling pretty much every day. So the weather is a big problem. The past 2 summers being really dry in a row have killed more trees than we were hoping for. And we got really good with our watering last summer, and we were watering all of the new sites every single week. And it was so hot too, that I don't know how much that was even helping. I think the heat and the dryness were kind of compounding together, and so this is kind of a sad part of the story, but the watering is really hard. You have a question?
Well, if there's a slope to the bayou, you try making a little bit of a berm with snow water and same water around the tree.
We've never done any ground moving type of work, but the best sites that have done the best in the droughts are at like naturally low spots and that don't have compacted soil. So this is the before and after of this project on aerial. This is the most satisfying image that I've ever seen because none of our sites are old enough to look like this yet. So sometimes I just stare at this one because the trees really have taken off. It looks like a little forest, and it's very satisfying. This is just in 2021. You can see how quickly those trees took off and filled in, and we planted all sorts of different species, but the ash and the hackberry grew really fast and seeded into the forest, and they kind of filled in some of the gaps. And the oak trees and some of the slower growing trees are hanging on. They're not being bothered by all of these quick successional trees crowding them. And we're seeing those now start taking off like 6 years later. So it's been really interesting to watch. And those early successional trees taking off helped the project so much. So we already talked about watering being a challenge. This is one of our really big tanks. But we have a lot of instances of tree damage. Sometimes if we plant and does someone uses the park in a way that they don't like where that tree was, they'll just pull it right out of the ground or snap it in half. Or it'll get hit by a weed eater or a mower. There's so many things that can damage a tree. Hurricane Harvey happened. This was planted kind of throughout 2017. So a lot of the trees were already planted before Hurricane Harvey. That caused a lot of damage in the park. But vines and herbaceous competition was probably the #1 problem. This is a tree, but it's completely encompassed in vines. And this was taken in the winter, and the vine is totally happy.
You know what it is?
It's a veg, I think. So, but there's, I mean, every type of vine you will find out there. It doesn't seem to matter which one. They just take off and they can encompass a tree in a very short period of time and take it all the way to the ground, kill it. So we do a lot of going out and by hand removing vines from trees, but that can be hard when you're planting in the thousands. And so we tried, and and another thing is the giant ragweed can grow so fast in one growing season, it shades the tree out and it just dies in the shade of that giant ragweed. So we did some kind of a research study on this project. So this is the buffer with all these different colors. And we tested different methods basically to reduce the herbaceous competition on the trees, just until they get old enough to handle it themselves. So all of these is a different treatment. They were repeated twice, and there was a control treatment that was repeated twice. And the treatments were mowing, herbicide, mats like the black landscaping fabric, mulch, and tilling. And they all worked in their own ways and did interesting things. But what we took out of it was that the most effective and the most cost effective and time effective was just mowing in between the trees until they can get big enough to compete. So that's what we have done now on almost all of our creation sites where we're coming in and planting these trees, is just continue to mow in between them for maybe 2 years or so until they start taking off, and then we can really let go and it becomes more of a natural area. In those years where we're mowing it, it just really kind of looks like a tree plantation. So these are some of our other creation sites. And pretty much if you walk up to any of the many that we have done, they're all gonna look just like this. We plant them 10 feet apart because that's a really good distance for a mower to navigate and not hit things and be able to turn. And we do a straight line so that the mower can do a straight line. And then this is a map on our tree plotter website. You can go to that website and see an interactive map of all of our plantings that we have done. And it is, every tree has all of the information, the date that it was planted, the species, the type, the reason why it was planted. And so you can create these maps where you can see all of the different species that we plant. So that's just one example, but I'll take a drink of water while you read those species if you're interested.
A lot of posts, that's nice. Yeah. Decent species. And a lot of smaller understory stuff too. Beauty berries and short staff. A few of them, because it's a little bit hard to read.
Yes. The question is if I can read the species, and I will.
Okay.
Okay, American beautyberry. That was actually, we don't usually plant that in a really open creation type areas. There's just too much sun until the trees get bigger. But there's this, there was a little buffer here of existing forest. So we just planted the beautyberry underneath there. We didn't bring it out into the sun.
Was there any particular sequence of doing it, certain trees next to other trees, or just kind of,
The question is if there's a sequence of where we plant the trees and if we plant certain trees next to others. No, we usually do completely random. We get the trees off the truck and they come kind of in order of species of how they load it from the tree farm. And we get them all off the truck and we mix them up just completely randomly, and then they get placed out next to the holes. And sometimes if there's a really big wet area where we know this needs to be a bald cypress or something, we'll go ahead and do that. But in all other situations, it's random.
The later question is, how do you determine the ratio of, like the number of trees for each species?
Sometimes it's based off of the supplier. But sometimes it's based off of the amount of sun in the park. We'll do more shade trees, more sun trees. This year, I kind of have changed some of our ordering to be a little more on the hardy side, a little more on the drought tolerant side, because we were seeing that drought is one of our biggest problems with keeping these alive, and we're still planting, all sorts of variety because never know what's going to happen. But we kind of moved in that direction. I increased our numbers of ash and hackberry even more, and things that just seem to take conditions better.
You keep track of the ones that die.
We do qualitative visual analyses. I learned that phrase recently. We were doing a quality plan with EPA, and they wanted us to use that a lot. Like, that's a good word because it means you just go out and look. So we don't have really any projects where we're going to every single tree and marking down this one died and keeping a list. But especially this past summer, the pines did not take the drought very well, and just driving by one of our plantings, you can see brown pine leaves just jumping out at you. But yeah, we just keep track visually. Okay, so now moving into just an example of an enhancement site. This was our first ever enhancement site. It was at White Oak Parkway along White Oak Bayou. It was funded by the Galveston Bay Estuary Program through their public participation subcommittee. So it was really built as a community engagement project, but with a habitat restoration at the same time. And we partnered with Houston Audubon and SCA. There's a lot of birders in this community that live around the park. I don't know if any of y'all are involved in that, but they're really active. This is also right by Woodland Park, so which is also a really big birder park. So Houston Audubon was a partner on that, and we did a lot of birding events, birding outreach. So all of these enhancement sites, really the main problem is the invasive species. And so we start with removing those, come back in with tree planting after to bring back the native species, kind of refill in those holes and add more diversity. And some of the community engagement was a pop-up birding station. There was a tent put along the Bayou Greenways Trail with all these binoculars, and they would just stop people and show them birds. We did a bunch of volunteer events, and then we had educational programs in the community center at Woodland Park. And then we installed interpretive signs at the park about riparian areas, birds.
That was my question, sorry.
I knew, I was like, this is a plant society, so I'm gonna do slides about species.
how much herbicide do you have?
Can you?
Oh, yes, the question is, how much herbiciding do we do? We don't really do any removal without some sort of herbicide application. We don't want to have to not actually have killed the plant. So with everything on this slide here, you can cut it down. With elephant ear, you can dig it out. but all the other ones, if you cut it down, it's gonna re-sprout if you don't spray it. So we usually come in, if it's a high traffic area, we'll completely cut it down with a chainsaw and do a cut stump herbicide application. If it's way off into the woods where it won't fall on anyone, we'll do like a hack and squirt application, kind of girdle the tree and apply the herbicide to the outside. And that's a lot easier because you're not having to take all of that material out and dump it and find something to do with it. And, so yes, we do use a good amount of herbicide. And here's the others. And these are really just some of the most common invasives that we see in our riparian areas overall, not just this park. But these are the most. And glossy privet. That's like maybe number one. Here's some other enhancement sites that we've done. And this also kind of shows some other invasive species methods that we've used. On the left, that is an area that was hydroaxed. If anyone's not familiar with a hydroax, it's kind of like on a track loader machine, and it has a attachment on the front that's this rotating teeth, and it can go up to basically a full-size tree and just grind it all down to mulch really quickly. So this whole area was probably done in less than a day, and it's really, really fast, cost effective. Usually this would be like grant funded situation because we don't own a hydroax, so we get a hydroax contractor. But if it's an area that has a lot, this was all glossy privet underneath these native trees. And so they come in and they grind it down to ground level, so that can sometimes prevent re-sprouting, but most of them will sprout back. And when they're little and they just have re-sprouted back, but have enough to spray, you can just do a really quick foliar herbicide and then they'll die. So that's one method that we've used in these sites, hydroax. We brought goats in at this park because we had funding to do a conservation crew, which is like a career development kind of temporary crew through the Student Conservation Association. But no human could ever go in there because it was completely full of poison ivy. And so we had this big conundrum because we had this grant funded crew and they couldn't touch our whole restoration site. So we brought in these goats, and it was I can't remember, it was over 100 goats, and they were in there for a week or two, and they ate all the poison ivy. And then we brought the crew in immediately after so they could do their hack and squirt and cut stump invasive removal. And then, which I know poison ivy, I think it can still, like, even if the leaves are gone, I think it can still bother some people, but we were okay. This was a situation kind of where we're pulling the material out. So these are some piles of privet that's been cut by chainsaw crews. And these are some of the interpretive signs that we put out. We have an interpretive sign at every single one of our sites so that people know what we're doing. This one kind of goes over the native tree species, so you can, with the name, so you can see what you're looking at. It has a map of Sims Bayou with all the parks along it. And with like a you are here, so you can see where you are. And then this one has a map of all of the bayous with the major Houston highways and showing Galveston Bay. And this one's all about water quality and things that you can do for water quality. And then a bunch of signs about wildlife. We started a tree farm in 2019, and it's really still a new project for us. The goal is to propagate species that we can't buy and that are not commercially available. There's actually a lot of organizations that donate trees to projects like these, and so it's not as much about kind of funding our own trees and saving funds on the implementation, but it's a lot about trying to increase our diversity and buying some species that are not available. So these are some of the species that are available. And they're really important in riparian areas, but there is a lot more than just these, and our vendor is really good at having diversity, but these are some that we find it harder to purchase. A lot of people, or some will sell red mulberry, but it's not always like true red mulberry, so be careful about that, and that's why we would really want to propagate our own. So that is all about the initiative. Just to summarize, we have 25 of these. We planted over 30,000 trees in this initiative, and you can see them all on our tree plotter website. We have interpretive signs, and we have really almost all the trees have been planted by volunteers. So we're trying to engage the community that lives near these parks and explain to them why we're doing this. And if you want to volunteer with us, these are some of our opportunities. We're at the Memorial Park Greenhouse on the second and fourth Thursdays of every month for plant propagation. If you live towards Clear Lake, we're there on the second Wednesdays for plant propagation. And then we have a restoration work day at Sylvan Rodriguez Park, which is our prairie, one of our biggest prairies, on every second Wednesday. They plant a lot of prairie plants for us. And then since I'm here, just with the Native Plant Society, I wanted to talk about our natural area permit. I see some of our permit holders here. Y'all might already know about it. But it is designed to permit native habitat plantings on private property. So if you're trying to grow native plants in your yard and you get a violation from the Department of Neighborhoods that you have weeds, that is the only purpose of this whole permit. So this is what it's there for. And we come out and do a quick site visit, and there's some regulations with the permit that you have to have native plants and things like that. And we will come out and give you this permit, and then it's designed for the weeds violation to be dropped at that point. So if you have any trouble, or if you know anyone that has any trouble, this is the email for any of our stuff. So if you want to volunteer with us, we send out a monthly update on everything that we're doing. And you can ask to be put on that update, and that is also where you can email if you are in need of a natural area permit, or if you have any questions that we don't get to today.
Is that permit the one? I think I've looked at one with regulations about how far from the sidewalk you can be, because I would love to plant like my whole house strip between the sidewalk and the street, but it's supposed to be 10 feet from the street.
Yeah, there's still some height restrictions in the permit. So you can plant things that grow up to 2 feet in that area. But higher than that has to be a little bit further away from like the sidewalk.
We find tree plotter website by just searching for that specifically, or does it have a website?
Yeah, I'm now thinking that since I mentioned it, oh, he's asking what the website is for the tree plotter. I should have put the link up here, but it's if you go to the Parks Department website and the Natural Resources page, we have a link to tree plotter on there, and I can also send it to you.
Things that the city's growing. Is part of that effort that we've done with cuttings from the existing plans that you might look for on?
Yes, we've done cuttings and seed before. And just from plants that are in our parks.
Are you drawing any southern post?
The question is, are we growing any southern post oaks? No. But that would be cool. No. Okay.
Linda Knowles has post notes if you want them.
Linda Knowles has post oaks. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we buy a lot of yopon and deciduous holly. Yeah, like. Linda's listing some species that have berries, hawthorns, green hawthorns. Gumbamelia, parsley hawthorns. Yes, that's exactly, a lot of those that you listed are hard to buy, so that's what we want to grow. Yeah, but she's saying that cedar waxwings are having a hard time finding food. We don't plant as much yopon and these understory trees yet. Well, and also because we just have so much sun until our trees get bigger, but that's one thing we want to do when some of these projects mature is to go back in with the understory ones, and some of them would just fry if we did it now.
There like a master plan of sites that will be enhanced or created in the future?
Yes, we have all of them. Oh. The question was, if we have a master plan of all the sites. Yes, we do. We have maps of all of them. Some of them are included, I have to scroll back a lot, on that coastal resiliency master plan sheet that we sent them a map and they actually only included the sites that are within the coastal zone. Because it was only coastal, but you can see a map there. Like this, we have one of these for every bayou. Okay.
So you mentioned mowing is effective in suppressing invasives. Do you just mow infrequently, like indefinitely, or do you get to a point where you like just stop mowing?
Yes, the question is, I mentioned that we mow in between our trees, and do we mow indefinitely or what the plan is? So we're only planning on mowing until we see that the trees are taking off and that they could handle themselves amongst vines and giant ragweed, and some sites don't have such aggressive plants just growing all over the place. So we've already let a lot of them go, even though the trees aren't that big, because nothing's trying to take over the trees. So it just depends on each site, but the ones that we are mowing, we just watch until they get big enough. And you can tell there's kind of a period where no growth happens, where the tree is just putting everything into roots. And then it's like this turning point and the tree just makes all this above ground growth all of a sudden. So it kind of tells you when it's ready.
You mentioned flood control and water quality. Have you had measurement, or are you making measurements in terms of how much water is being retained when blank trees?
No, the question is, are we measuring flood mitigation from the buffers? No, we're not doing that. We are interested in adding research studies onto it, but there is a a lot if you do kind of a literature review of riparian buffers and all the sorts of different ecosystem services they do. There's a lot of literature out there. There's so many questions I don't know how to pick. Okay.
So does a book. Does it come under, your. purview? Because when they redid the park, they moved all the riparian, buffer along the bayou. And then the next season, they had a hurricane and then the sand was like 30 feet high. And they still haven't quite put it back in. So, I mean, it's all like mowed lawn.
Yes, the question is Buffalo Bayou Park under our purview because there was some riparian area removals
bayou
and on the
before.
bayou. Mhm. We own the park, Buffalo Bayou Park, the Parks Department owns it. There's a organization, Buffalo Bayou Partnership, that's kind of the conservancy of that park. So handful of parks are under that setup, this being one. The Houston Arboretum operates and maintains this park, and Memorial Park Conservancy does that for the rest of Memorial Park. So the Conservancy handles a lot, but we do still have a say. I know Kelly, our natural resource manager, has met out there a lot with their conservation manager. So yeah, we will be involved, but not all of the decisions are like from our program. Because there's that conservancy there.
Do you want to say like 2 more questions? Whatever you want to say.
Whatever is the time amount is okay.
Yeah, like we have like 10.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, go ahead. I don't know. Oh. What is the plans for White Oak Bayou is the question, and are we involved in some of the stuff happening with White Oak Bayou? I've heard about some of the stuff happening, but I haven't seen any of it come down to being like a big discussion within parks yet. But we have a lot of parks along White Oak. I don't know if that's for a segment that's not within a park, and then most of the areas right along the bayous are within the flood control. They have easements within our parks. So there's a lot of overlapping jurisdictions and things. So yeah, I don't know much about it.
And you water the new trees every 2 weeks. How many gallons do you put on each tree when you water it?
I don't have that number. The question is how many gallons go on each tree when we water it? I don't have the number.
Do you water 10 minutes or 5?
No. I think so it's usually someone standing there with a hose at the tree, and they're probably not there for more than like a minute. But sometimes the soils are extra dry or extra compact, and you can kind of watch how it's taking the water, and that would be kind of, you would change up how quickly you were gonna leave from there or not. So no, I don't have a number or any standardized.
Questions on Zoom?
The cemented bayou, are they going to remove that?
The question is, are the cemented bayous, is the cement part gonna be removed? I have no idea. I think that's someone from flood control would have to answer that question.
No questions on Zoom?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.